Here's a question. Should doctors who don't agree with transgenderism be forced to change their views? Does that violate the First Amendment? Valerie Kloosterman might have something to say about that. She's a longtime physician's assistant, and she's facing something like this issue firsthand. She's also here with a lawyer connected to the First Liberty Institute. Thank you both for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Yes.
So Valerie, your case is very interesting. I think many people are not aware. I would love to hear from you, just tell us the story of how did you get caught up in all this, and when did your religious beliefs start getting you into trouble?
Yeah, so I worked, I've been a physician assistant for now 20 years, but at the time, 17 years for the same institution. It was Metro Health, and then it was purchased by the University of Michigan Health around 2017. In a small kind of rural country area. It was actually the private practice where I was a child and had my provider there. I was actually born at the hospital. That's kind of associated with this story. My mom worked there. My grandma worked there. It was one of those things that kind of growing up, super excited to kind of be in the same field and career that they were. And then, be at the same institution that they were at. So no issues, no concern. Absolutely loved my patients, loved the providers that I worked with. But with the coming on of the University of Michigan, there were some questions on a yearly mandatory test that I'd taken the entire time I'd been there, very specific to gender being fluid. And I could not answer no, that gender was not fluid, that we are made in the image of God, that males are males and females are females. I couldn't answer no to that question and complete the required training. And they had said in the outset of the training, hey, if you didn't complete this, right, you were at risk of being terminated. So I raised some questions and said, hey, I can't answer this. What I felt was both medically appropriate and without violating my conscience. Initially, the conversation was, oh, okay, nobody's really asked us this before. We're not quite sure how to navigate through this. And then we were able to set up a meeting with a DEI director, HR, and then a physician assistant liaison. I assumed the meeting was going to be about the questionnaire and a very specific HR role of, okay, what do I need to do? And after about literally 30 seconds into the meeting, I understood that it was a much more personal meeting, that was not their intent to be there. It grew hostile. I tried to state what I was asking, specifically, and they delved into, but would I use preferred pronouns and would I refer patients for transgender surgery? I was a little taken aback with those questions. I was not taken aback with my answers that I said, no, I can see patients. I've seen patients of the LGBT community, have not had any issues or concerns. At that point, I was called a liar, that could not be, that there would not be LGBT patients who would want to see me. I could not convince them otherwise. And then very blatantly, when I said I would not refer for transgender surgery after being asked, I was evil. I was causing patients to go out and commit suicide. And I, in a very God-driven way, was calm and said, I can see patients. I can see patients compassionately. I think they deserve care. I think they deserve appropriate care. But with medical knowledge, I have studies I've looked at, but also with, my conscience to God, I cannot refer them for surgery. After that meeting, I was told we were going to continue the discussion, that we would be able to have more of a conversation. That unfortunately did not happen. About 3 weeks later, I was called into HR and handed a termination letter. Very abruptly, I was not allowed to return and complete my charts for the day. I was not allowed to let my patients know why. I have several patients who, to this day, needed me to call them and give them information that I was not able to do. And I feel like I violated their trust in me in that moment. Obviously, I couldn't. They didn't allow me back. I couldn't collect my personal belongings. The hospital is at a different building than where I was at, and so I was not allowed back on the premises. And And I was shocked. My family was shocked. Hearsay now, the office had no information about that. And something that could have easily been accommodated, something that easily could have been a conversation of, this is a hypothetical situation, there are no patients involved, that we could have had a conversation, and they just simply refused to do that.
Well, it's a pretty incredible story. I think what's most remarkable about it is there was no actual victim here. This is all hypothetical. There's not actually a person who complained. And you say you've treated plenty of LGBT people and never had a problem, but it was just a hypothetical HR representative thinking that you would have some problem. You know, I'm curious because I know, for instance, that when certain, medical professionals don't want to perform abortions, for instance, they're able to not do that in many places. They're able to have a conscience exemption and a lot of places just allow them to not participate in abortions, but they can do other things. Maybe this is a question for you, Doug. Is that the case? And what is the landscape right now with conscience exemptions for medical professionals? I thought it was pretty common to allow people to say that violates my beliefs, I can't do that, and to just accommodate them.
Well, there's a lot of different laws. There's this lawsuit was primarily brought under the federal Title VII law for religious discrimination, and under that requirement, the employer has to reasonably accommodate any request. And within the clinic that Valerie worked in, there were several doctors who had different concerns that were accommodated a variety of different ways. And so accommodation under Title VII law is a standard, and an employer must comply with that unless it would cause a substantial undue hardship. That wasn't going to be the case here, but they didn't even enter into that dialogue. Then under the First Amendment, because the University of Michigan is a public state actor, they also had a responsibility to recognize her First Amendment religious liberties and protections. And they didn't do any of that. And then different states have different laws on a conscience objection by medical care providers. But what's really, Casey, I think kind of shocking in this whole case is there was no dialogue. There was no investigation. And the thing that also is troublesome, it not only harms Valerie, it obviously has a big impact on her family to come home and have to say, well, because I stood up for my faith, I'm going to lose my job. It hurt her patients. It hurt her co-employees. It had ripple effect, and they didn't seem to consider any of that. They quickly went to a termination and, in a self-righteous way, declared that she was evil. And it's really, I could see maybe a sole practitioner being completely oblivious to what their legal responsibilities are, but an institution as big as the University of Michigan completely ignoring her statutory and constitutional rights it's almost breathtaking. The way they treated her.
Yeah, it's interesting. They invoked moral language and brought morality into the conversation when
exactly,
because it kind of prevents them from saying this is just doing business.
Right.
You're saying this is a moral issue.
There's some judgment here.
Yeah, they're making a moral judgment on you and your beliefs. They can't just say it was only just doing business because they clearly had a moral element in their decision, which is really interesting. I think people also are unaware that DEI is not just about race. It's not just about, as I've said before, helping poor, minority kids get scholarships or something. I've reported extensively about DEI and the entire LGBT agenda. It is far from just being a racial effort or, trying to be diverse or generally kind to all kinds of races. It has become very pro, LGBT, pro gender pronouns. We saw that under the Biden administration. And now, of course, Trump has issued these new executive orders around gender, around DEI. I'm curious, Doug, just turning it back to you. Does that affect this case at all? And what is the legal look ahead? What's next on this? What's next for Valerie?
Well, yeah, let me quickly just say the survey across the country is, and really was prior to some of the activities from the Trump administration, you were starting to see private businesses back away from DEI, some public institutions backing away from it. I think because it was so strongly embraced and pressed against people, I think once some of the private employers and public employers saw the consequences, they started pumping the brakes. Now that's not across the board. And we certainly haven't had the University of Michigan tell us, sorry, we'll back away. Where we are procedurally was we filed the lawsuit back in October of 2022. It went for almost 14 months. The University of Michigan filed a motion to dismiss. The judge entered an order in 2023, early in 2023, saying, no, the case shouldn't be dismissed. It should be allowed to go forward on certain theories. And then after that, they filed 14 months into the lawsuit. They said, wait a minute, we have an arbitration clause, and we want to have this kicked out of federal court to arbitration. And unfortunately, the trial court judge granted that. So we went to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals and said they've, in effect, waived that, to invoke the authority of the court, ask the court for an order to dismiss, and then come back after all that process and suggest, okay, never mind, now we want to go to arbitration. We said they, in effect, waived it. And so that was argued to the Sixth Circuit a couple of weeks ago. And we're hoping, we think the argument went well. We think the questions were encouraging to us. It's always a little bit dangerous to speculate too much from oral argument. But our hope is that the Sixth Circuit will reverse the dismissal to arbitration and reinstate the matter back into the federal court. We can get going in discovery and get this case tried to a jury in Michigan.
All right. So we're pretty early on in the, I mean, maybe it doesn't feel that way to Valerie, but we have a lot left to do. Sounds like,
Exactly.
Valerie, sounds like you were fired for what you believe in. I'm curious, as we wrap up here, do you regret your decision? How do you feel about the future? How are you doing personally when you think about all of this and what lays ahead of you?
Yeah, I do not regret my decision. With that kind of coinciding, has it been difficult? Absolutely. Has it been hard? Has there been, portions of your life that then just kind of get put on hold? Just with the whole process, I am beyond blessed to be working with First Liberty, right? This is not something I could have been able to take on by myself, just from a legal perspective, but also with the support and knowing that I don't need to be ashamed for what I did, and I don't need to back down in this process, even though we've hit some road bumps, from a legal perspective. My kids, my family, I have 4 kids who our conversations around the dinner table, I guarantee you, are different than what we thought they would be when my kids were little. But we've had the opportunity to witness to them. We've had the opportunity for them to say, hey, this moving forward for you, whether this is your battle or something else, you need to be faithful, right? God requires you as a child of God, to stand, whatever that stand is. And hopefully we're ingraining that. I think, I think we are. But that's been a totally different conversation, I think, kind of involved with this. But yeah, no regret. I do, often think, right, to be fired by the department, the DEI, the Department of Inclusion, who said, okay, we include everybody, but we don't include you. I think for my kids as Christians, to hear that is hard, but it also gives them to, that fight of, no, I know what I am. I know what I believe. I leave this house every day as a child of God, and that is how I'm going to live, and that's how I'm going to reflect in my life. And if Mike and I can do that, right, and glorify God in the process, this is all worth it.
Well, Doug, Valerie, thank you. We'll be following this case. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah,
Thank you.